Shri Rama Rama Ramiti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tatulyam Ramanam Paranane. I delight in the beautiful name of Shri Rama. I delight in it again and again, for even once remembered, this name of Shri Rama bestows on us the fruit that is equal to the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. So this is a recorded version of the continuing story of Rama, the Ramayana. And it requires a little bit of peremptory comments, because we have now gone to that chapter that deals the actual war when Rama and Lakshmana, the Vanaras, are actually in Sri Lanka and the war is about to take place. But war is an unpleasant thing, and this chapter may be unpleasant to some. And yet it is a fact. The war that occurred some, let's say, 5,000 years ago, contained in this story, is very obviously a major, major war that stood out in humankind for some 5,000 years. And in such a war, we would have to equate it to major wars which are contemporary in our history, relatively speaking. And as I may have said before, currently as I'm speaking, 32 countries are at war in one way or another. There are 18 terrorist insurgencies going on as we speak. 9 civil wars are there. There are 2 drug wars. Colombia and Mexico are involved in them. And there are 2 conventional wars going on, one of which we really know a lot about, Ukraine and Russia. That's always in the news. We have 1 war of ethnic violence going on between, let us say, 1998 to 2003, 5 years, 5 million people perished in a war in the Congo, or the Democratic People's Republic of Congo, as it's called. There was a history going back to the Napoleonic Wars. Over 12 years, some 5 million people perished. In the 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics, so spanning 30 years, some 8 million people died. And don't forget, the world population was much less in those days. And for example, in 1927, the Chinese Civil War itself claimed another 8 million casualties. World War I claimed 18 million lives. World War II claimed 70 million lives. And we don't know what the cost of the current wars are at the moment. So war is, quite frankly, a horrendous thing, not just causing death, but causing home displacements, widows are created, and so on. We have to also understand that the wars in the days of the Ramayana were conducted in a very systematic way, designed so that no civilian gets injured or involved, purely military on military. This is where we get the modern game of chess from, derived from Persia. Persia had the system, but Persia and the sub-Indian continent were really one thing in the ancient days. And we have rules of chivalry. Between nightfall and sunrise, you can have no war taking place. And so in the morning, there's a mutual understanding. The war begins for that day. And there are rules for people in chariots. There are rules for foot soldiers. There are rules for the elephant corps, as it was in those days. This is a conventional war. What we're talking about here is an unconventional war, because the Vanaras are only armed with sticks and stones, literally, with local weapons. And Rama has some military weapons, no doubt, Lakshmana also. But their main weapons, really, in these ancient days, were really the mantras, that is, the intentions which are going on, the strength of mind. And so we find in the Ramayana stories about magic, spells, and so on and so forth. And we can either take them mythically or we can take them literally. If we can take them literally, we can understand there is a physics behind it, a kind of part of philosophy, natural philosophy, that says that thought is extremely powerful. The thought itself is a mobilizing weapon for the entire universe. So we're coming to that chapter, which is to do with the binding of Rama and Lakshmana. And Valmiki gives graphic details as a factual record of this war, unpleasant as it is. But you see, today, children watch cartoons, which are very gory, illustrating a contrast between good and evil, a kind of morality. There are always the good people, there are always the evil people, and there was always a fear factor inserted into children. And I'm not personally sure whether this is healthy for the children's psyche. Nevertheless, children are involved in wars today and have been involved in wars for a long time. When you displace people, civilians are involved. These days, when I say these days, all these wars and conflict that I've just mentioned have all involved civilians. This is not the chivalrous war of the ancient days. Now we'll find during the story that there are some breaches of the normal chivalry rules of warfare, and that indicates the character of the combatants. They don't wish to fight fairly. But Rama, just to remind you, Ravana is informed that Rama's Vanara host surrounds Lanka like a tumultuous sea. And so naturally, as is his nature, in an angry mood, he goes up the tower to his mansion and surveys the scene. And he sees on every side Vanara warriors. You can just imagine the scene. And what are they armed? They're armed with trees, they're armed with boulders. And of course, he's wondering, how can he destroy this vast invading force? Because it's a numerical force. They're outnumbered, it seems, and yet with crude weaponry. Anyway, at the same time, Rama is looking at the city of Lanka that is guarded by the Rakshasas, and he can see with his mind's eye the sad figure of Sita held captive within the walls. And of course, because of this, he orders an immediate assault, just to let you know where we're up to. And so anyway, shouting, a victory, a glory to the Vanara king, a victory to Rama, victory to Lakshmana, the Rakshasas, the Vanara army, both of them rush at each other, and the Vanaras are rushing in on the doomed city because we know what will be the outcome of this war. How do we know the outcome of this war? Well, if you're familiar with the story, you'll know it. But if you're not familiar with the story, you can easily surmise the outcome of the war because of Rama's dedication to Dharma. Anyway, Ravana himself sends forth, I should say, a big army. And he commanded it to go out and slay all the Vanaras in one go because he's underestimating the potency of the Vanara army. You can imagine they're all beating drums, they're blowing their trumpets, and the whole sky is reverberating with this martial sound. And they fall on the Vanaras. And the Vanaras are using boulders and trees and their own nails and fists to oppose the Rakshasas. And as I may have mentioned before, is reminiscent of the Zulus in South Africa during the Zulu Wars against the more sophisticated or more sophisticated armed force of the British, who also underestimate the power of the Zulu warriors, only armed with shields and assagais. Assagai is a kind of short spear. So anyway, these boulders and trees and nails and fists we can imagine, and thousands fall dead, but thousands on either side. And the field becomes covered with blood and mangled bodies. Now, besides the gruesome engagement, there were many individual duels going on between individual warriors. And Valmiki describes Angada encountering Indrajit, like Rudra against Yama. And there was a duel between the Rakshasa Prajanga and Sampati, one of the companions of Vibhishana. And Hanuman fights a duel with Jambumali, and Nila with Nikumba, all these various names of distinguished military people. And Lakshmana fights with Virupaksha, and so it goes on. And the chariot and horses of Indrajit were destroyed. And Angada receives a blow from the mace of Indrajit. Now don't forget, Indrajit has special powers. And Jambumali hits Hanuman with his weapon, and Hanuman smashes his chariot to pieces. The Rakshasas concentrate their attack really on Rama. He's the central figure. And they fall in thousands under Rama's arrows. Rama is the only one with conventional weapons on this side of things. Well, with Lakshmana, of course. Vijunmali, he aims his darts at Sushena. And Sushena smashes a rock with the chariot of the Rakshasa. And Vijunmali jumps out with his mace and attacks Sushena. And Sushena crushes him to death with a rock. And in this way, many warriors, they fight, and many warriors die on both sides. And the battle rages throughout the day. And even at night, the Rakshasa wouldn't stop fighting. This is a breach of the chivalry. And therefore, a response has to be given. The battle becomes fierce, and the blood flows in streams. And there was a terrible slaughter on both sides. Angada attacks Indrajit, and he slays his horses and chariot and smashes the chariot to pieces. And the Vanaras admire the skill and strength, of course, of their prince. And they raise shouts of joy. And all the warriors in the army, they praise the Vanara prince's powers. But Indrajit loses his temper. That's what makes him a Rakshasa. And he loses his temper along with his chariot and resorts to sorcery. He has these ultra powers. Now, making himself invisible, that's his power. He aims darts at Rama and Lakshmana, and they are greatly harassed at this attack from a foe whose whereabouts no one could discover. It's being attacked from nowhere. And of course, it seems that their arrows are being showered on them. There are deadly missiles from all sides. They don't know from where it's coming. And then Indrajit shoots a particular weapon described as serpent darts. He aims it at Rama and Lakshmana, the two central figures, and binds them. We can only imagine it's something like a net or something like ropes or something. In any way, it makes them completely bound and completely helpless on the battlefield. Now, what does philosophy tell us? Moral philosophy tells us that there are binding forces that restrict our freedom and serve to act as obstacles in our effort to free ourselves from tyranny. The tyranny of the senses, the tyranny of the wayward mind. In short, the tyranny of our own ignorance, where everything else comes from. And so each one looks at each other, wondering, what will we do? And Lakshmana's grief at Rama's plight is very obvious. And as for the Vanaras, they're helpless. They stand around in mournful wilderness or bewilderment because the leaders of the whole movement, the reason why they're fighting, are helplessly bound. Bound by what? Bound by anger. Indrajit, this is Indrajit's anger. And Indrajit then gives way to conceit and congratulates the whole Rakshasa army, and he returns to the city because he thinks the whole war is over. Once you're able to combat Rama and Lakshmana, the whole thing is finished. So he returns to the city and he's exulting in his victory and boasting, and he goes to his father and he announces, you see, the story of Rama and Lakshmana is now over. And Ravana is beside himself with joy, and he embraces his son Indrajit and praises his prowess. And the Vanara warriors are now wounded, they're downcast, they're dispirited, because they're seeing Rama and Lakshmana laid low and helpless. And they conclude also, it's all over. Vibhishana, who sees Sugriva standing helpless and forlorn, puts courage in the Vanara king, because when we are bound, it produces pain. And when it produces pain, we have to bring in a rival value. We have to bring in strength and courage. We have to bring the virtues of purity and goodness. These are inherently courageous. And so, Vibhishana, who sees Sugriva standing helpless and forlorn, puts courage in the Vanara king. It's foolish to lose hope, he says. Look at Rama and Lakshmana. Their faces are still bright. They're not dead. You think they're dead? No. They're just stunned. So don't be afraid, because soon they'll recover from the swoon and resume fighting, because Vibhishana knows these weapons. And the chief, he takes heart and he does everything to save the army from panic. Now, great generals have the capacity to do that. If we take, for example, despite all the flaws, human flaws that Napoleon had, and despite some critical military mistakes, errors, you can see by and large his military career was outstanding, but he had leadership qualities whereby he was able to instill in the most hopeless of circumstances great courage in his men. And I often say the test of a leader and leadership is, will the people who follow you, will they follow you to the ends of the earth? Is their personal loyalty to you above reproach? Do they trust you implicitly to lead them out of any difficulty? And so the person who gives the troops tremendous courage and gives them a boost of energy, this is truly a wonderful leader. In meantime, Ravana has publicly proclaimed in the whole of Lanka that Rama and Lakshmana, they've been slain by Indrajit. And he sends for his women and he says to them, please go at once and inform Sita and Rama that they are no more, that the two princes lie dead on the battlefield and the Vanara army is now destroyed. And also convince her finally to take her in the Pushpaka Vimana, a kind of low-flying aircraft, no doubt, and show her the battlefield from above. Today we have drones that do it. And let the obstinate one, that is Sita, see for herself what's happened. And seeing that she has now no one to look to besides myself, she'll turn to me. Now you'll understand that if this happens, this is the second time that Sita has seen the demise of Rama. The first was in the kind of illusion of a head, Rama's head, and now she's going to see Rama and Lakshmana bound and stunned and helpless and dead. That's the assumption. So the Rakshasas, they do as they're told, and from the Vimana, Sita sees the field of battle, and of course she sees not only all the decimated bodies, the goriness of the scene, but she also sees Rama and Lakshmana lying motionless on the ground with their weapons scattered by their side. And she is naturally filled with grief. We know that this is a real story because this is a human story. The human elements are there. And so she thinks it's now all over, and she weeps, she cries, "To this end has fate brought me, giving the lie to the predictions of saints and astrologers, that I would live as a happy wife and a mother and a glorious queen. Nothing seems to have gone well. I was banished, or at least I decided to go with my husband for 14 years into the forest, and now I was abducted, and now you see I was taunted by the Rakshasas, and now eventually this, the hope that Rama is going to come and rescue me, the whole thing seems completely hopeless. I don't believe in all these fortune tellers anymore. I don't believe in the wisdom of the sages. I can't do anything. I feel hopeless and helpless." And so you can understand her condition. And poor Kausalya, Rama's mother, who shall console her now? Like one who, having crossed the ocean, gets drowned in a little pond, these warriors who had done so much is all worthless, is pointless. They're all lying dead now. And the princes, how was it that your divine weapons failed you? Alas, all-powerful is destiny. We tend to become a fatalist when things go against us and say, it is as it is. Now, when Sita was thus in desperation of utter sorrow, Trijata, you remember, her Rakshasa companion, who was looking closely at the motionless figures of the princess, suddenly burst out, because she was fond of Sita now. "Dear Sita, there's no cause for grief. Neither your husband nor Lakshmana are dead. Look at their faces. Look closer. Is this how the dead people look? They're bound by a charmed weapon. They're unconscious just for a while. It's only temporary. Look at the orderly array of the army. Have courage. Don't be frightened." And her words fall like nectar in Sita's ears. Just as when truth falls on our own ears, it becomes a joyful moment, a revealing moment. And so the Vimana returns to Lanka, and Sita was taken back to the Ashokavana. And in time, of course, the force of the arrows charged with sorcery weaken. So what happens is Rama opens his eyes, comes out of his unconscious daze and sits up. And though sorely wounded, he recovers his strength by an exercise of willpower and sits up. Throughout life, we will also be wounded, no doubt. It seems to be like that. But our sheer willpower will make us sit up and start again with great strength and courage. And so he looks at his brother also lying on the ground, and he cries out, "Alas, what's the use of victory now for me? Why did I bring you, dear brother, with me to the forest and get you killed? How can I return without you to Ayodhya? You used ever to console me in my sorrow when I needed it, but now, of course, you're silent. And when I face the greatest sorrow, you remain silent. How can I survive? Where in the world is a warrior like you?" And so he's doing this soliloquy here because he sees Lakshmana in this hopeless condition. And he continues, "One can replace anything lost, but where can I find another Lakshmana to fill your place?" Now, like Kartavirya, Arjuna with his 1,000 hands, you with your 2 hands discharge showers of arrows and slay, and you slew the Rakshasas. But how could death come to you? You see how you came to the forest with me, and now I shall now repay my debt to you by joining with you to the abode of Yama. I confess defeat. Now if life is like that, the end of the story is now with us. Rama's self-defeat. The word I give to Vibhishana cannot be fulfilled. O Vanara king, return to Kishkinda now with all your warriors. You have worked hard for me. You have fulfilled all the duties of friendship. You have continued a loyal alliance to the end. You have my deep thanks. But there's no use in more of you dying. It's hopeless when we see that there's no use anymore of, war where it becomes senseless. We may as well give it up. And so go back to your city, please. Let me perish here. And so Rama laments in grief, which is a helpless kind of grief. And then Vibhishana arrives. He arrives with mace in hand. See the character of Vibhishana. Seeing his huge dark form, the Vanaras imagine, actually it's Indrajit. And they again start to fly. But in another part of the battlefield, Sugriva and Angada are having a discussion. Why are the Vanaras there, thus beginning to run away and scatter in all directions in fear? What's happened? And Angada answers, well, don't you know that Rama and Lakshmana are lying wounded? And Sugriva says, no, it's not that. Look at the way they're running here and there, helter-skelter. There must be some other reason for it. And then, of course, they learn that the Vanaras who'd suffered at the hands of Indrajit, they mistake Vibhishana for his brother, and they become frightened. And so he sends Jambavan to rally the troops by disabusing them of this fear. So we find helpful things coming as if disguised. And when we recognize the value of a person or a place or a new situation that actually comes to our help, it recovers our courage to go on. And so all the troops become rallied again and disabused of their fear. And Vibhishana looks at Rama and Lakshmana, and when he sees them, or when he saw them wounded, covered with arrows all over and unable to fight, then he himself breaks down crying. That's the emotional attachment he now has also. And also feels it's all over, despite the fact that he's giving courage to everybody. What more is there to do? And Sugriva turns to Sushena, his uncle, and says, well, you take Rama and Lakshmana to Kishkinda. I personally alone shall kill Ravana. I shall personally redeem Sita. I shall personally bring her here, or bring her there. But Sushena answers, there are herbs which can heal the wounds of the princes and restore them to health. And some of us know where these herbs are to be found. So here's Hanuman, who has the capacity to fly long distances. And if you send him, he's going to go and fetch the herbs. And so even as they were speaking, the sea and the air were churned up by a mighty wind, because Hanuman is the son of Marut, son of the wind. And the great bird Garuda bursts into view because it's the vehicle of Vishnu. And when Garuda arrives, the serpent darts that have covered Rama and Lakshmana start disappearing instantaneously. They were all actually venomous serpents, not ropes, because ropes that bind you are equivalent to venomous serpents. And then, of course, we see the great illustration of the principle of the Vedanta, which says that this world is all mithya, it's just an apparitional universe. And the example given is mistaking a serpent or a snake, or mistaking a rope for a snake. Something coiled up, a superimposed idea it's a snake, resulting in great fear or great attachment or a reaction, certainly, which will not free us from the bindings of this. As soon as our illusion is lifted, as soon as we become no longer deluded, then we automatically see the fullness of the truth. So anyway, all of these venomous serpents get released because a way is found to heal the wounds. The wounds are so serious. You can imagine these two people helpless, they become victims of attack now. And so all these serpents introduced by magic, Indrajit's magic, that had bound the prince's bodies, they all started disappearing. And when their inveterate and dreaded enemy, Garuda, appears, they take flight. Then Garuda gently strokes the bodies of Rama and Lakshmana and restores them to their full strength. As soon as the Lord approaches us, all our illusion is gone, all our bindings are gone. But we still have wounds to heal. And these wounds are the results, if you will, of our actions called prarabdha karma. We have to still go through. We have to exhaust that in this life. And so, the Garuda who gently strokes the bodies of Rama and Lakshmana and restores them to their full strength, but the wounds were all healed and they rose up stronger and more radiant than before. And Rama asks, "Who are you, my benefactor?" He didn't know what he was, that he was Vishnu, and Garuda was his own bird on which he always rode. Now a theological question can arise. Rama, an avatar of Vishnu, doesn't know his own nature? How is this? But you see, in order to be useful in this world, we also have to fall under the spell of this world and deal with it in the practical terms. It's no good saying to a carpenter, "Please building me a table," but I know actually it's all in the field of quantum physics, and actually our atoms are appearing and disappearing, and there's no permanence to this table, and it is all a project of Maya. A carpenter is not interested in that. He says, "Please give me your design for the table, and what wood would you like it carved in, and what is the particular design, and what are the dimensions?" And so, for practical purposes, the illusion has to, or the relative world has to take place, and we have to use it as our arena to operate in. And this whole story is within that particular arena. And so Rama asks, "Who are you, my benefactor?" And he didn't know what he was, that he was himself was Vishnu. And that, of course, Garuda is a vehicle. Because, you see, all of the deities require vehicles, vahana. And the reason for that is because the vehicle represents the power. It is not Vishnu that preserves. It is Vishnu's power that preserves. It is not Brahma who creates. It's Brahma's power, creative power, that creates. It's not Shiva that dissolves and destroys. It is Shiva's power. And so Garuda answers, "Well, I am your good friend. I am your old companion. Glory is yours. Let me go now. When the battle is ended, we shall know each other better. When this world is done with, and we have done our individual or performed our individual role in life called Swadharma, with our individual skills and talents and abilities, once we have done this in all selflessness and all truth, then the glory of the divine is revealed. Even the glory is revealed through the relative world." Anyway, he says, "Let me go now. When the battle is ended, we shall know each other better." And saying this, the Garuda flies away. Seeing Rama and Lakshmana fully recovered and ready for battle now, the Vanaras are once more enthusiastic once again and resume attacking Ravana's fortress. Now, this would be a great surprise to Ravana. So Ravana, from within his palace, is surprised to hear Borne on the wind, the jubilant acclamations of the Vanaras, who he thought must then be mourning their vanquished leaders and slaughtered comrades, and be completely defeated and discouraged, and will leave the battlefield, no doubt. And he turns to the Rakshasas standing beside him and asks, well, what's happened to make the Vanaras so joyful, so jubilant? Something strange has occurred. Please go and find out what it is. And soon many Rakshasas climb up and look over the wall, and returning, they say to Ravana with great fear and trembling now, O king, the Vanara army, led by Sugriva, is attacking the fortress with renewed spirit, and Rama and Lakshmana are both alive. Like elephants, they've broken their bonds, and Rama and Lakshmana have shaken off the naga darts, the serpent darts, with which Indrajit has bound them. And they are rejoicing, and they've rejoiced at the army and are raging about the field like hungry lions. So the darts of Indrajit have actually proved futile. In the same way, when we are under attack, we have the saying, of course, in English, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. And yet we get so wounded by words. Anyway, Ravana's face naturally falls. He's filled with anxiety and says, I marvel at what you say. No one till now has escaped these particular darts. And if those weapons were powerless against these men, then we're in trouble. We're in great danger. And then with an excess of anger, naturally, that's his nature, he shouts, listen, Dhumraksha, why should I worry when you are here? Get together all the men you want, and go at once and destroy these two little insignificant men, then return quickly. It's an easy thing. And Dhumraksha was indeed happy and proud to be thus singled out by the king. And he takes a party of warriors and, issuing out of the fort, comes into contact with a group who under Hanuman were attempting to enter into the western gate. And in the battle that ensued, there was a huge slaughter on both sides. And in the end, Dhumraksha was slain by Hanuman. And a few Rakshasas escaped into the fortress back again, but most of them lie dead outside. And news of this great discomfiture reaches or fills, I would say, the Ravanas with uncontrollable fury, that being their nature, that's what makes them Rakshasas. Ravana hastily summons Vajradamshtra and says, O bravest of all warriors, well, go without delay, destroy these wicked fellows. Come on, just do it. And Vajradamshtra bows low before the king and follows up with a mighty army which sallies forth from the southern gate. And in the southern gate, they encounter Angada. Now, you see, if we think we have defeated one particular mental aberration or psychological obstacle or obstacle in our spiritual path, we shouldn't underestimate things. And nor should we underestimate our own capacity to defeat. We have the capacity to remove all obstacles through divine grace. So the Rakshasas, under the leadership of Vajradamshtra, they wage a grim battle and they slay countless Vanaras. And yet the Vanara army stood firm. They wouldn't withdraw. And armed with boulders and trees, they kill innumerable Rakshasas. On both sides, the fighting was intense. And in the end, Angada and the Rakshasa chief fight hand to hand for a long while. Vajradamshtra was slain, but he fought gallantly to the last. And the Rakshasas, they run away in confusion. The Vanaras surrounded Angada and they shout jubilance. They express their exaltation. And then Ravana orders Prahasta, send a Kampana, and let him have the most terrible Rakshasas to accompany him. Let them go and slay Rama, Sugriva, the Vanara army. None can resist Ankapana's might and skill. And accordingly, Prahasta sends an army of Rakshasas under the leadership of Akampana. And true to his name, Akampana was held firm and immovable in the battle. And he had chosen his weapons and his warriors very carefully. But as he advances, he sees bad omens. Bad omens meet him. And we can see the power of omens in all battles, how they have the power to elevate the spirit or diminish it. Anyway, neither he nor his followers take these omens in any way seriously. The noise of their challenge rises above that of the ocean itself, and a great battle ensues. Now we can see that blood flows in streams. Now we've seen such things as movies, but the horrors of war are really devastating, even though it's warrior upon warrior and no civilian involved, not like modern days. How can there be any justification in modern days for wars which either are the terrorist-based or based where civilians get hit and targeted and where there are casualties and deaths? So the battle there goes against the Vanara warriors initially, because you see the great battlefield flows with blood, streams of it there, and dust rose from it and cut off the sun, plunging the earth in portentous gloom. And the slaughter on both sides were enormous. Kumuda, Nala, Menda, Dvivida, they all attack Akampana, who defends himself with great courage. Now, as I said, the battle went against the Vanara warriors. They were about to have a retreat. But when Hanuman arrives, bringing courage and hope, things change, and Ankampana sends forth a shower of arrows at him. But Hanuman takes no notice, and lifting a huge boulder and swinging it above his head, hurls it at Ankampana. The Rakshasa darts intercept the stone and reduce it to powder. And then Hanuman grows in size and shines with blinding brightness like the sun, and uproots a big tree, and he attacks the Rakshasa with it and slays him. And the Rakshasa army is smashed. It's smashed like a forest in an earthquake, and the survivors flee in panic from the fatal field that was strewn thick with the dead and spread the dismal news in Lanka. The Vanaras surround Hanuman and uproariously express their admiration. When a victory comes to you, we should celebrate. You should celebrate if victories come. And if you have an eye to see it, every day there is a victory. We have to count our blessings. Anyway, Ravana's spirits, they fall when he receives the news, even of Ankapana's death. But he finds strength diverted in the emotion of anger and also desperation, and begins to think of new plans. So he goes around the defenses of the city again and takes advice with Prahasta, the commander-in-chief. What the advice is like this. We must break this Vanara siege. We should issue at the head of the whole army and slay the Vanara chiefs, not in bits and pieces. Myself, Kumbhakarna, yourself, Indrajit, or Nikumba, one of us 5, should take up the responsibility of leading the army out of the fortress, the whole thing. Are we not afraid of monkeys? Why, they just used to run away in terror on just hearing the roar of the Rakshasas. And they don't know the science of war. They're unsophisticated. They're unskilled brutes. How have they managed to stand all our attacks? And Prahasta answers humbly, well, things have happened as we foresaw. We respectfully submitted long ago that it would be best to restore Sita and make peace. But I'm bound to obey you. Nevertheless, you're my king. I'm prepared to sacrifice my life, my family, my all for your sake. So I shall lead this sortie, and if such is your pleasure. And a huge army then was collected, and everything was gotten ready for a major assault or counter-assault. And this included the solemnization of special rites and sacrifices also. We recall in the last world wars, particularly the First World War, say that armies on both sides sought God's help and troops were blessed, presumably, leaving God in a fix, which side will we support? Then Brahasta marches out to the beating of drums. Evil omens present themselves, but he disregards them. And seeing the great army led by Prahasta issuing out of the eastern gate of the fortress, the Vanaras roar with joy. They are waiting for battle. They are so injected with adrenaline. And like moths rushing at a flame, the Rakshasas fall on the Vanara army. Look, says Rama, there comes out a Rakshasa at the head of an enormous army. Who is he? And Vibhishana replies, oh, it's Prahasta, the commander-in-chief of Ravana. A third of the imperial army is his to command. And then there was a great and grim battle ensues between the Vanara army and the boulders and trees, with their boulders and trees, and the Rakshasa equipped with swords and spears and arrows and bows, and exchanging showers of stones for arrows and grappling in death, grips at close quarters. Both sides fight fiercely, deluging the battle or the field with blood. Prahasta's followers, Narantaka, Mahananda, Kumbhahanu, and others, they were opposed by Dvivida, Durmukha, Jambavan, and the former were slain. And there was a prolonged battle between Prahasta and Nila. And at last Prahasta, armed with a massive mace of iron, rushes toward Nila. And Nila, for his part, uproots a big boulder and with it smashes Prahasta's head, killing him on the spot. And the Rakshasa warriors, they flee in every single direction you can imagine. And after this great victory, Nila goes to Rama and Lakshmana and bowing low tells them what happened. And Rama and Lakshmana praise his prowess and congratulate him. And some of those who fled from the battle, they carried to the Rakshasa king the news that Nila, son of Agni, had slain Prahasta. And Ravana now is beside himself with rage and grief at the same time. My warrior chief, he says, who could vanquish Indra and his host of gods, have been killed by these Vanaras. We can't treat this lightly anymore. We must destroy Rama and the monkey host. And so saying, Ravana gets into his chariot and goes forward like Rudra, the destroyer, and seated in his radiant chariot, issues from the city. And Ravana beholds the Vanara army and hears their uproar, which resounds like the ocean. Up to now, he has severely underestimated their power. But now, at least 1/3 of his army is decimated. And seeing a new Rakshasa army issuing out, the Vanaras stand ready to receive them with stones and trees in hand. And Vibhishana points out the Rakshasa warriors one by one to Rama. There, seated in the chariot and shining like the rising sun, is Indrajit. This is the great advantage Rama has. He has the insight from Vibhishana. And so he goes out from one renowned warrior to another till he comes to Ravana himself. And there in the big chariot, radiant like the sun, sits the 10-headed Ravana. And we know why there are 10 heads. Because there are 10 senses, 11 if you include the mind, the king or the queen bee, as it were, of all the senses. You have the senses of information, and you have the senses of reaction. And Rama beholds the majestic and glowing form with interest and pity. A great warrior, no doubt, he says, but he is so wicked, he has to be slain, and in this way we have to slay the wrong direction of our senses, which are part of our mental makeup. And Ravana attacks innumerable Vanaras and lays them low. Nila opposes Ravana gallantly, but he was felled by a fire dart. And Hanuman attacks Ravana with violence, and the two fight an equal battle for a while. But Ravana couldn't be subdued, and he wreaks great havoc in the Vanara, amongst the Vanaras. There was a great fight between Lakshmana and Ravana, and Lakshmana falls down unconscious, but Hanuman intervenes and carries Lakshmana away to Rama. And then Rama, riding on Hanuman's shoulders, gives battle to Ravana. The Rakshasa king is actually sorely wounded now, and his golden crown is broken. And so is his chariot. And deprived then of every weapon, he stands eventually before Rama. You may go now, said Rama. You have fought well today. Go away and rest and come back tomorrow, refreshed and with weapons. And Ravana retreats shamefacedly to the city in great humiliation. But look at the wonderful chivalry and compassion of Rama, the ideal warrior who says, we have fought, you have fought well, congratulations. And I see that you're wounded. Go away, go nurse your wounds. Tomorrow's another day. We will leave it there with the Ravana returning humbled and dejected. And we are witnessing also all the deities rejoice for seeing the speedy end of their troubles, where the story begins. So next week we'll carry on with this story. We'll continue where we find the giant is roused, and we'll see how things continue from there. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.